Welcome back to Birken live stream. We have another opportunity this Sunday to answer some questions. And without further ado, we shall ask Piyadasi to give us the first question.
Ajahn, our first question is from the live chat. It's from Smith. When I'm in the first jhana and visualizing the Buddha, in my expression of deep gratitude and love for him, my mind gets very bright and my heart literally races in my chest. I'm still sitting there in posture with a big smile and sometimes even tears of joy and gratitude. But then my heart races so fast. Is this okay? Is this PT overdrive, and how does one handle it?
We're off to a good start here, aren't we? This very energetic devotional start. Not everybody has this capacity for what's called saddha, or faith. And the fact that you're able to visualize the Buddha, recollect the Buddha, which is a legitimate focus of recollection and meditation. It's called Buddha Nusati, is very interesting. And so there's a spectrum of people, and some are very much moved by the recollection of the Buddha. This is what we would call the faith orientation. And others are endlessly reading big fat books on analytical structures of meditation, and that they're on the panya side, and they're deeply absorbed in that. There are something called 5 faculties, spiritual faculties, which all need to be cultivated. And saddha, that faith, is one. Energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And all 5 of them need to be developed and balanced. So it seems you have saddha, or faith, in spades, and you're able to attain a state of rapture. And so this is a feature of also the first jhana, and people may not be familiar. That they perhaps think that to enter into jhana you need the breath and so forth. But a number of different topics are given which can arrive at what we would call the first jhana. And characteristic element of the first jhana is joy. And if joy is not there, then it's not the first jhana. And you mentioned brightening of the mind. Again, this kind of feeling of the sun coming out from behind the clouds and so forth. I should say, by the way, that you shouldn't take it too literally. It's mind light. It's the light of the mind. It's the light of the heart. It's the light of emotion. So you're experiencing rapture, and that's fine, and your heart is racing. Now, that's interesting, but that is an effect of joy as well. In the commentaries, they talk about 5 levels of this joy. Piti, which is called piti in Pali, is piti, P-I-T-I. And it goes from mild to so that you, in its most extreme form, you feel like you cannot stay on the ground. So you're uplifted, and it might be, in fact, many reports of people levitating. I don't think that if we had you on a scale, that the scale would show that you're levitating, but certainly the interior experiencing, the whole feeling of your body and mind can be so enraptured that you feel weightless. And another common experience is tears of joy. And so tears of joy can happen. Shivers running through the body, rushes up the spine, the hair standing on end. So this is, you see this in other religions as well, the being enraptured. You'll see this also in people encountering, movie stars or charismatic people or religious leaders sometimes who they have a great amount of faith in, they will dissolve into tears and of ecstasy and so forth. So this is what we're talking about here. And yes, the body can tremble. Sometimes people faint even. It's quite interesting. Certainly, I don't think it's dangerous. I imagine most people would envy you that you have such rapturous faith. So it's a very interesting part. And sometimes Buddhism is presented as a kind of a study of mere philosophy or ideas. And it's clear that in the time of the Buddha that there's also an enormous element of faith. And in fact, when you go to Asia, into the Buddhist cultures, that faith is the primary element you encounter, that they feel a rapturous joy and confidence in even the sight of a Buddha image or the sound of some chants in Pali by monks. It reminds them, it sweeps through them. So that's how it works. For those who have not experienced this, perhaps in your culture, like when the national anthem is sung, when your team wins the Olympics or something in the national anthem, you feel the tears well up and this shivers up your spine and etc. So you can kind of understand it from more worldly experiences, what's going on there with this rapturous engagement with faith and appreciation of the Buddha. So thank you for the question, and let us go on to the next one.
Ajahn, our next question is also from the live stream from Ari. Greetings, Ajahn. I had a question about overcoming the feelings of loss and separation. How would you contemplate that while the ones you are afraid of losing are still alive? Example, a child being abandoned.
Yes, it's a major issue for many people, abandonment, and it affects people often for the rest of their lives. If abandonment happens in childhood, sometimes people have a fear of that, and in all relationships, they feel an anticipation of the possibility. Buddhism is very, very good therapy for this, because it actually turns you towards the fact that all things, whatever I have, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. So we treat this ailment of insecurity and fear of loss, of relationship, of people, by actually reinforcing the fact that you are indeed in contact with the truth. It not only may it happen, it most certainly will happen, one way or the other. Other people die or leave, or you die or leave. And at some point, all that you are familiar with will be left behind at the time of death. For Buddhism, death is not simply annihilation, but is a transition. And suddenly you're more or less kicked out of your house. There's a knock at the door at some time in the night or in the day, and you're peremptorily told to vacate the premises, and you can't take anything with you. Not your relationships, not even a pencil. No money, no nothing. You're removed. You can't even take your body with you. And you must start again. This is the vision that the Buddha has of the universe, and what Dhamma is this impossible to avoid situation of loss. And so all we can do is prepare not to be too dependent on the relationships and structures we have around us. And as we do that, our anxiety, our fear, our insecurity will lift. We become able to understand that all things by their nature are impermanent and out of our command and control, and that they must eventually depart. Is that a feeling of despair? No, but it demotivates your desire for attachment. And ultimately, in terms of the final stage of enlightenment, is that one no longer has an interest in returning to this state of transience. One does not wish in any way to return into this transient universe, which you can only ultimately lose in, lose everything in. And so the strategies of the Buddha are to cultivate well-being in the midst of this loss, but you can only do this when you have some strength and independence and are able to face truth and reality. And so this is a great therapy, and all people need to undertake this in order to live without fear in life. That is an answer in brief, yes.
Ajahn, our next question is from Duk Duk from the live chat. What would be proper conduct when one is at the receiving end of frivolous speech?
Well, there are various responses depending on your personality configuration. Some people are able to be blunt, abrupt, to cut off a conversation, and it seems that it's their nature to do so. Others find that very awkward. They don't like to offend people. People babble away about things they're not interested in, and they politely listen as the person wastes your life. So frivolous speech the mark of frivolous speech is that you feel tired after either you've listened to it or engaged in it yourself. Is a kind of a drain on your energy. The mark of profitable speech, of good speech, right, beneficial speech, is that it energizes you, motivates you. And so this is the how to determine frivolous speech or pointless speech. And lots of people endlessly need to feel comfortable. They need to fill the air with sound and speech. And so others are subject to that. It's almost a nervous habit for some people. So you will, in fact, as you become a more serene person, you also become a greater enjoyer of silence and the absence of constant speech. The more comfortable you feel within your own skin, the more you appreciate stillness and quiet. The less comfortable people feel within their own skin, the more they tend to engage either in speech themselves or just constant stimulus from outside, endlessly leaving maybe a television and a radio on at the same time while reading the newspaper. So they crave a constant source of some sort of stimulation, anything other than the hollowness of just being. But if you're cultivating a healthy mind, a proper mind, then you will appreciate and cherish just being. The tactics will evolve naturally for avoiding company that wears you out, if you can. Now, sometimes you're in a situation where you have to work, and the people that you're working with are constantly chattering at you. I sympathize with you, but do your best to treat yourself well and find a escape from oppressive, excessive, pointless, frivolous speech. Maybe you can tune it out. Try not to fall into resentment or anger at it. Then, because that's another unskillful thing. Sometimes you just have to listen patiently and not react. See how serene you can be while more or less another person is something like a radio in the background. If you can turn it into that kind of neutral experience, then that's fine. You will explore strategies for this, aside from the ones I've just suggested. So let's go on to our next question.
Ajahn, this next question is from Ali from White Plains, New York, in the United States. It seems to me that right mindfulness and right concentration are the opposite of one another. Right mindfulness requires awareness of one's feelings, thoughts, etc. This requires a, quote, panoramic view of one's mind. Right concentration requires one to be fully concentrated on a single meditation object, e.g. the breath. This requires a single-minded focus. How can one remain mindful if one is concentrated? This misunderstanding is causing a lot of agitation and doubt in my practice. Please advise.
Yes, right mindfulness persists and is one of the central elements of right concentration or right samadhi. Samasati is the translation for right mindfulness, and sama samadhi, right concentration. So mindfulness is an element that has reached its proper strength and purification by overcoming the hindrances, the psychic irritants. And that's the function of mindfulness, is to take you from the sixth factor, right effort. And right effort instructs you to eliminate and prevent the re-arising of the 5 hindrances and to bring into existence the 7 factors of enlightenment, the important purificatory factors. And right mindfulness is the next step in the path, and that's the bridge to right concentration. It delivers you to right concentration, but accompanies you in the midst of right concentration. It holds your hand in this land of purity called samadhi, and is your faithful companion in there. It keeps you aware if you're drifting out. It keeps you aware that you have achieved your goal, and it keeps you aware of what is still to come. So it is an informed assistant for the support of samadhi. You will see this fully explored in what we call Abhidhamma, the listing of the positive, beneficial mental states, and mindfulness is always in the midst of them. You will see in descriptions of, I think, the 3rd jhana is essence is mindfulness, as well the 4th jhana, essence is mindfulness and equanimity, purified mindfulness with purified equanimity. So it's mentioned again and again as the essential ingredient in this cake you're baking. Without that lovely clarified butter and sugar, the cake is not going to taste very, very good. It's an essential ingredient in samadhi. So don't make them, they're not opposites. They are companions, and you can't have one without the other. So there should be no sense of conflict in this. Understand that you have an awareness in the midst of your samadhi. It doesn't mean that your mind is wandering, and that you use the word panoramic awareness. That is not necessarily what is active in samadhi. You are not examining in samadhi. You are knowing. So you know what's present. You know that joy is present. You know that bodily ease is present. You know that you are absorbed in the topic. and you know when the mind is stabilized and fully present to it. And then as you go deeper, you are aware that even the joy is subsiding into a different and more tranquil experience. So that knowing part is mindfulness. It's an awareness. It doesn't disturb the situation. It is a required observer in the situation. You may be getting confused with mindfulness as a kind of so-called vipassana practice, where mindfulness is some sort of neutral observer of things as they pass away, and that you remain in a non-samadhi kind of state of consciousness. This is somewhat of misdirection, and it is indeed a whole series of schools of Buddhism and meditation advocate that structure, but as you can plainly see if you read the basic outline of the Eightfold Path, the function of mindfulness is not purely as an observer, but as a purifier, a reporter, a sentry, which prevents the arrival of negative emotional states and encourages and helps entry into the positive mental states. So it's very active, very discriminated. So this is another thing of some Vipassana types ideas, non-discrimination of the contents of the mind, so-called mere detached observation of whatever the contents of the mind are. This is not the instructions of the Eightfold Path. There is constant discrimination and removal and prevention going on all the time. It is not possible to be detached from your own hindrances. You are involved in the hindrances, and you're not a mere observer of them. So the Buddha is advocating that you prevent, remove, purify, and continue to observe, but at the same time be active in removal, prevention, and the encouragement of positive mental and emotional states. So, let us go on.
Ajahn, our next question is from the live chat from Bhavani. How to differentiate feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness? It's very difficult to differentiate them for me.
Yes, indeed. And I don't think you need to be so precise. You may be following some sort of analytical idea that you must be very precise in your discriminations. But basically, I think all cultures have these categories of experience in human experience. Everybody knows, every language has a word for the body. And the body is substantial and material. Every language has a word for pain, for pleasure, and for neutral feeling. They have a word for bodily feeling, and they have a word for emotional feeling. And they also have a word for what we call sanya, or perception. And that is mere that you get familiar with things, and they have a history to them. So when you look at a glass on the table, you have learned in very early childhood what that is. It's not merely a transparent object or a shiny object. It's a glass, and it can contain liquids, and you know that it's fragile. It can shatter. This is sanya, and all language contains that. It's a form of memory, is what it is. Decision making, of course, is part of every language as well. Somebody decides and then they act. And then consciousness, of course, we're aware, and consciousness from a Buddhist description is that you are conscious of a sight, a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch, and activities of the mind. So this is consciousness. So these things are all obvious to everybody, I think. I think by going to extremes of trying to see these things. It's not the indication of the Buddha. I think it's just becoming fully aware and contemplating this a bit. What a strange machine we are. All kinds of things are ricocheting and happening and interpenetrating, and feelings are triggering decisions, and decisions are triggering feelings, and then you're remembering and you're experiencing and you're seeing and you're feeling. So this is what is meant. This is a 5-spice curry. And the spices are all mixed up in a little plastic bag, and you pour it into the pot, and then you pour it over your food and you taste it. And it's not really possible to completely separate the 5 spices. They're all interpenetrating and interacting with each other as well. And you don't have to do a chemical analysis on it. You simply have to taste it and know it and contemplate their essential natures. All of them, all of these 5 khandhas, which we call 5 aspects of a human, are changing and impermanent. So that this is the kind of the essential features of the 5 khandhas, in brief. So let us go on.
Ajahn, our next question is from the live chat from Alex in Spain. Dear Ajahn, how does one practice resilience, especially if one wants to commit to the holy life? It seems like with my generation, we lack the enduring capacities to go through hard times as we've had such easy lives compared to earlier generations.
Well, you're not necessarily given the capacity for patient endurance and resilience. You learn it by testing yourself and pushing your boundaries. And so people in my generation also, the young man who ended up in the forests, monastic forest tradition in Thailand, they came from Western, fairly cushy kind of lifestyles. And it's very austere and very requires a lot of patient endurance. And they found out they could do it, that they could get up at 3 o'clock every morning, and they could stay up all night long sitting on bare wood floors, and that they could walk barefoot endlessly through villages to collect food, and that they could live on any food that was given, not to their preference, but simply nourishment, and they could live with simple robes, and they could do the chores in the monastery, cleaning the toilets and preparing water for washing your feet and so forth. And they could live with other young men appropriately and harmoniously if they tried. And so you learn by trying, and you learn by example. And of course, it helps to have supportive community when you do this, so that, and I've seen, of course, people overdo it. They over-exert themselves, and they can't manage. And this is the experience of the Buddha. Before he was the Buddha, as a bodhisattva, he fell in with a crowd who were pushing themselves to the utter limits of human capacity, and he stopped at some point, being wise enough to say, this is just destroying my body. It's not benefiting me. It's the wrong approach to life. And so he took up a somewhat central. And of course, he had come out of the softest, cushiest life you can imagine. He was a prince, right? So he didn't have to work or do anything, and lots of good food, and anything he wanted he could get. So he's the example that you can use. Here's a man who came out of the cushy life, fell in with people who were destructive to the body, pushing it too hard, and he chose the middle path. So you have to find out, well, what is the middle path? Sometimes when you hear or people read about Buddhism as the middle path, and then they find out about the lifestyle of monks, they think, wow, that doesn't sound very middle path to me. It sounds really austere, but it's certainly middle of the road compared to the austerities that some religious communities indulge in, and they can be harsh indeed. So you have to understand it's an elegantly sufficient life. It's finding out what you can get by with without abusing the body, because the body, of course, is not an enemy. It's simply a vehicle. And so you treat it properly, you wash it, you keep it healthy, etc., but you don't let it become the point of your existence. The mere indulgence in soft things and good food is not enough to make a happy life with. So that's the kind of the attitude you have to develop. You have to find out, what am I doing here? What is this? What is this middle path they talk about? Okay, let's go on to the next question.
Ajahn, this next question is live from Phineas. How to stop saying things I regret to people I love?
Yes, well, you start in the morning and you do some beginning just a few minutes before you do anything else. Just like try to get yourself to remind yourself of kindness, and that if you can get off on the right foot, to begin well, it makes it much more likely that you'll end well. And this has to be done on a daily basis. And sometimes if you keep blurting out and reacting, and so some people even pride themselves on being unfiltered in their speech. Oh, I have no filters. I just say whatever comes to my mind. I'm just straightforward and blah, blah, blah. Yes, you are, and that's very unfortunate. So retrain yourself not to be a blurter of things, because as you can see, you regret it later. There is a saying, speak in anger and you'll make the best speech you ever regretted. So anger and a critical, priding oneself on the critical faculty of finding the faults in everything is similar to what intelligence is, but it's not what intelligence is. We even teach kind of this phrase in school, critical thinking. And sometimes it's not understood. Critical thinking is not being critical or finding the faults of everything. It's lucid intelligence, and it shouldn't be accompanied by anger or ill will, because anger and ill will distort things, amplify faults, and you don't see the whole picture. You're not actually thinking critically. True critical thinking is a balanced and appropriate sense of the situation, and being merely a critical person is that you emphasize faults, you dwell on faults, and then you say you're very good at articulating the faults. But later on, when the mood, the angry mood passes, the irritable mood passes, you regret what you said, because it wasn't actually true. There is another dimension to the person, another dimension to the situation, which balances things. So this is why we have to look through the lens of goodwill, loving kindness, in order to see things accurately. Otherwise, we'll have distorted perception about this. Greed is the opposite of that. It emphasizes the beautiful qualities, which are not absolutely balanced and true, and anger emphasizes the negative qualities, which is not balanced and true. So you need loving kindness, which allows the whole picture to come into mind and to be skillful with your speech. So let's go on.
Ajahn, this question is from Carlos from the Canary Islands, Spain. How to remain calm under unpleasant situations, particularly ones that inhabit one's own home?
I would say that you have to have a little phrase that you keep repeating to yourself. the worse the situation, the calmer I need to be. It's in the difficult situations that calmness and equanimity and balance are the best things to be. It's easy to be that way in pleasant situations, but as soon as the situation goes bad, people use the wrong apparatus. It's like a ship is going down, and they put a heavy lead jacket on to deal with the situation. Well, that's just going to make you go down. That's going to drown you faster. So it's in difficult, awkward situations that you need to abandon agitation, fear, impulsiveness, impatience. That's when those things are the wrong strategy. So you need that phrase. One of the phrases I teach people is, the worse it gets, the better I feel. Now, that's because the situation is dire, you must feel well in it. That's the proper response. Anybody can feel well when everything's going well. But you need to say, I want to always feel well. And especially when things are going bad, going sour. That's when I need to be light and free, because that's the best response. So that's almost opposite to the way the general world describes things. It cuts sharply against the general conversation in the world. And you need to find people who talk this particular way and listen to that on a daily basis. Hear this kind of talk on a daily basis, because the other type of talk, which is full of sound and fury, is the standard in the world, and it will pull you in if you do not find countervailing voices. So listen to my talks on equanimity, on loving kindness, and there are many, 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 and they're all on YouTube, listed there. And they will keep pulling you back towards being centered and balanced and at ease in the midst of difficult situations. Okay. Pia.
Ajahn, our next question is from the live chat from Jonathan. Good morning, Ajahn. Is there such a thing as too much practice and study?
Yes. In all fields of life, including the spiritual, you can overdo it. And you can read too much, you can study too much, and you can sit too long, and all of these things. And dedicated people know this. They remember, they learn on their way that they overdid it sometimes. So I'm named after a figure in the Pali Canon in the time of the Buddha named Sona. And Sona was a very energetic person. He had been a musician before. He became a monk, and he played a stringed instrument, something like a guitar, a veena. And he was so hyper energetic that he did a walking meditation until his feet bled. And one of the things he was noted for was his tender feet. So he's from a fairly high-class family, and he never walked around barefoot before. But he was so ambitious and spiritually ambitious that he would walk till all hours of the night and till his feet bled, and then he didn't know what to do because the path was covered with blood. And at that time, the Buddha appeared to him and said to him, he was thinking about giving it up. So when you overdo things, sometimes you think, maybe I just can't do this. I'll do the opposite. I'll give it up. He was thinking about going back to his family and playing the guitar, So the Buddha appeared and he said, you used to be a musician, and when you tune your instrument, when you tune the guitar, if you turn the keys too heavily and make the strings too tight, what does it sound like? He says, it doesn't sound good. And if it's too slack, what does it sound like? It doesn't sound good. So there is a right tension for tuning your instrument, isn't there? Is just right tension in the strings. And then what happens, Sona? What happens? Oh, then music can be made very beautiful. I says, that is the way to practice. That's your spiritual practice. And not too tight and not too slack. And then the music appears. The point of the spiritual practice appears when the effort is appropriately balanced. So thank you for that question. Let's go on.
Ajahn, our next question is from the live chat as well, from JFLDN. Dear Ajahn Sona, what do you make of the perennial philosophy, the idea that many religious traditions are pointing to the same ultimate reality?
Yes, the perennial philosophy, and I think there's a book called The Perennial Philosophy by Aldous Huxley, which is very engaging. And it was a time in history, in modern Western history particularly, where the rigid idea that Christianity is the only and triumphal religion was softened up, and bright people like Aldous Huxley were able to appreciate that there were teachings, especially in India and China, which were very, very sophisticated and wise, and that they also covered some of the same ground as the best of Christianity did, and that perhaps there was some sort of central idea in all of these religions. I think, though, that it's an easy enough idea to come up with and to find things that either completely overlap or sort of overlap. But each tradition has its classical strengths, and in Buddhism, I just don't see some of the tenets of Christianity and of other types of structures. And the Buddha himself encountered many other religious teachers and said, so his teaching was that the Buddha teaching is like an elephant's footprint in the jungle, that all other animals' footprint fit inside that footprint. So he said, it's a very large, my vision is very large, and others cross over into it, but don't fill it. So his own opinion was that other teachings had elements of his, but were not full and complete in the sense that his was. So we have to listen to the founders of these religions themselves. They didn't accidentally come across, they weren't accidental Buddhists or accidental Christians. Now this, in the modern times, in Buddhist countries, you're simply born, people even say this, they're born Buddhist. Well, you're not born Buddhist. And in Christian countries, you're just born into a Christian family. It's just what the family does. And that's what I would call an accidental Christian or an accidental Buddhist. But for those who think about things and examine things, it's not an accident. So I'm not accidentally a Buddhist. I investigated all kinds of religions, and I investigated even different Buddhist schools for weeks, months, years at a time, decades sometimes. And I didn't accidentally blunder into this. It was with a lot of clear and a lot of investigation and discrimination that I end up with a particular vision. So I think it's just too easy to have this idea, oh, they're all the same, they all say the same things. No, of course they don't say the same things. There are moments of overlap, etc. But really, it's a daunting task to actually investigate, inquire, and to sometimes give up ideas that have comforted you which are not true sometimes, and you'll see this all the time in people converting from one religion to another or one idea to another. They realize that there are faults to what they thought, and there are better ways of thinking. So it's not it's not necessarily the best way to approach these different philosophies and religions as simply saying, oh, they're all the same. They're not. Okay.
Ajahn, our next question is from the live chat from Brad. In the Dhamma Thai forest tradition, they speak of the Chitta as the knowing essence of the mind that lies beyond the five khandhas. Does this not go against the Buddha's anatta? Thank you, Ajahn.
Yes, it's a peculiar phrasing and so forth that I prefer not to concern myself with it. I look to the Pali Canon, the Theravada Pali Canon, for how the Buddha described the situation. And if he couldn't manage to articulate something like that, then I don't know how other monks, why other monks would think that the Buddha couldn't manage to express that idea. So I find that within the teachings of the Buddha is the source of my information, and not through commentaries or teachers or even what's called the Abhidhamma, but primarily just through the suttas. And it means reading over many, many, many of the suttas. And when you come across some peculiar feature that's not mentioned in any of the other suttas, like rarely some sort of a remote and rare phrase that occurs, if it's not repeated on a number of occasions, it probably isn't what the Buddha indicated. So the central teachings are, the five khandhas and etc., and a kind of consciousness. And this, when you use even the word essence, the Chitta as essence, outside of the five khandhas, what on earth does this word essence mean? Does it mean unchanging or changing? Because there is no indication in the Buddha's teaching of an unchanging essence. There is only indications of anicca. So that's how I would approach things that I've heard. And the Thai forest tradition, particular teachers within it, etc., say this, say that. And Burmese Abhidhamma schools say this and say that. And Vipassana schools say this and say that. And then there's devotional schools. And then there's the Mahayana schools, etc., etc. In facing all of this, you need to have a good grasp of the teachings of the historical Buddha in order to assess and to understand these teachings. Okay.
Ajahn, our next question is from the live feed from Briaji. Dear Ajahn, should a person decline drugs like morphine at the end of life?
No. I think that medicine which relieves pain is appropriate in certain circumstances. Morphine is something of an intoxicant, but pain, unrelieved pain, is a worse intoxicant. And this is what you see in the Vinaya, the rules of conduct for monks, that a monk who is in extreme pain for a long period of time is exempt from responsibility for having broken rules, because it is enough to drive you out of your mind. And so the Buddha is not interested in you facing pain unrelentingly. He's saying, reduce suffering, don't increase it. But this means that, many people use morphine or heroin or all kinds of drugs as they're not essential to reducing their pain, the physical pain. They are ways of dealing with emotional issues that should be dealt with other ways and can be dealt with other ways. Or they use it as an amusement, and it intoxicates them or reduces their capacity for clear thinking. So you see that many crimes have their roots in intoxication. The beginning of all kinds of mischief is intoxication. But this has nothing to do really with extreme cases of pain and so forth. The other question that people ask me regarding this is that I want to be clear when I die so that I can shape where my future birth is. And I don't want to cloud my mind with morphine. But I would say that the process of the death moment seems to be very clearly described in the suttas and in more sort of refined Abhidhamma text and so forth. And it's an incredibly fast and highly conditioned process, which is not influenced because people die in car accidents and so forth. And it happens in a blink of an eye. If you really need to be in a serene contemplative state, then the way many people die in very unusual and difficult and unserene circumstances. So if the death moment was always dependent on you being in a serene and collected state, then it would be hopeless. The work of what happens at death is done throughout your life. The shaping of that determining moment of death and how it leads to the next life is a process which occurs over your whole lifetime and is influenced by mostly the moral dimensions of your life for most people. So if one has done many good things, then that will be the determining factor at death. And if one has done many bad things, that will be the determining factor at death. And for a certain smaller number of people who have entered into supernormal mental states, such as jhana and so forth, that will be the determining factor at death. So people shouldn't over worry about the condition that they're in when they die, because it's going to happen in a finger snap. And the primary conditions are the events of your life in the moral dimension and in the development of the higher mind as well. Okay, let's go on to our next question.
Ajahn, this next question is on the live feed from Sanahad Bagan. I'm not able to manage overthinking something that happened in the past, and it is leading to anxiety. Whenever the anxiety hits, the feeling of regret, guilt, shame fills my heart. How should I overcome this?
Yes, you want to you want to only think about it when you are in a state of profound goodwill for yourself and for others, or when you're well rested, when you're not hungry, when you have been influenced by the voices of the wise and the kind. And it's in that state that you can contemplate events, perhaps unskillful acts on your part or on the part of others. There's only two things that bother us: things we've done to others and things that others have done to us. Now, we do things to others that are negative because we don't know any better, and others do it to us because they don't know any better. And then we have to deal with the trauma left behind. And this is not done well with anxiety, fear, confusion. So you want to not deal with it in those times. That's when people deal with it. Say that 3 o'clock in the morning, they can't sleep, their mind is in a weakened state, and then they start drifting back to these difficult events. And that is exactly the wrong time to do that. So you have to very strongly retrain yourself. Say, there is a time and a place to deal with difficult situations in my life, and I need to be at my best. I need to be convinced that I don't need to do that at any other time, that only bad results will occur. You need to repeat this 100 times to yourself. And you need to say, anytime between about 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. is not a good time to review the traumas of my life. I need to be awake. I need to be well fed. I need to be rested. I need it to feel in the company of the wise. I need to be in a good state of mind, and I can review it in that state. And then it will lose its potency. It will lose its sting. It will lose its terrifying nature. And then eventually you will forget about it. You won't need it. So, one last question, Pia.
Ajahn, our final question is from Dhammika from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Dear Ajahn, how could one use 4 elements as their sitting meditation object?
Well, the 4 elements are air and water and earth and fire. These fire can mean heat as well. But of course, notice that it's very interesting. These are primary elements. And they are calming to us as well. First of all, just to be out in a spring breeze, sit on a park bench and feel a spring breeze blow across your face. We respond to the feeling of air, especially fresh air, different temperatures in the air. It's refreshing. It uplifts us. And then water, of course. We love the sound of water. We love waterfalls and rivers, and sometimes we like lakes. We like to gaze at the lake. We want to immerse in the lake. We have a hot shower. We wash our face with cool water or warm water in the morning. See our relationship to these primary elements. The earth itself, to step out into the farmland, to walk across the earth, to walk across in nature, across the grass, especially bare feet. You walk across the grass, you feel it. The solidity of the trees is also part of the earth. The earth element is the solid element. So stones and trees and the ground itself. Even a dish, a favorite dish that you have in the cupboard, or a nice coffee mug and so forth, is a solid, earthy element. It's something you cherish, and it feels good, and you can focus on and appreciate. And of course, staring into the fire, a lovely warming fire in winter. Excuse me. And the person who asked the question is in what city? Calgary? Well, there you would appreciate a nice winter fire, perhaps, or even a candle. The calming effect of fire, staring into the fire, taking a bath, stepping out into the spring breeze, all of these things are the elements, the primary elements. So you can use any of them as a basis for absorbing the mind, restoring the mind, returning the mind to a basis, getting it to stop thinking about everything and just relax. So that's one place to meditate is in a nice deep hot tub or a bathtub, or in a shower and so forth, or on the balcony in the spring breeze. So this is the how we contact these elements and how we bring them into helping us restore a sense of well-being and health in the mind. That is in brief. I have talked about this extensively in different talks on YouTube as well. So examine my talks on jhana, my talks on the foundations of mindfulness, etc. Okay, well, we will leave it for today.